The lights of the studio glowed warm and golden, a carefully crafted illusion of comfort designed to make millions of viewers feel like they were sitting right there in the front row. But behind those lights, behind the polished desk and cheerful mugs, an unease simmered, because everyone on set knew today's guest wasn't just any celebrity. Oprah Winfrey didn't walk onto a stage. She shifted the gravity of it. She carried with her the sort of presence that made people sit up straighter without realizing why. Backstage, just minutes before, producers had done their usual dance, checking hair, adjusting mics, pretending like their hands weren't shaking as they reminded each other that Oprah's team had specifically asked for substantive discussion, not tabloid noise. It was a reasonable request. But the view was never quite predictable, and Joy Behar was even less so. She had arrived that morning in a particularly sharp mood, ready to tear into the headlines with her signature brand of provocation. Even Whoopi had eyed her from across the desk and murmured, "Don't start anything stupid." Joy had just shrugged, and then Oprah walked out. The audience rose to their feet in one unified rush, the applause so thunderous it felt like it pushed air across the set. Oprah smiled, radiant, warm, almost regal, as she waved to them. She wore a deep plum blazer, fitted perfectly, and a soft silk blouse that caught the light whenever she moved. She hugged Whoopi, kissed Sarah on the cheek, exchanged a polite greeting with Alyssa, and then turned to Joy. "Joy," she said with a bright, professional smile. "Oprah," Joy replied, matching the smile but not the warmth. The moment the two exchanged that look, Whoopi noticed it. A flicker, a warning, something electric beneath the surface, like the air seconds before lightning strikes. The interview began as smoothly as expected. Oprah discussed her upcoming documentary about generational trauma and community resilience. Her words flowed with practiced eloquence, her charisma filled every corner of the room. She described families she'd met, stories she'd heard, and the deep responsibility she felt in amplifying voices that were too often ignored. The audience ate it up. Even the crew leaned closer. But Joy Behar hadn't touched her cue cards yet. She only watched, waiting. Finally, she slipped a card from the middle of her stack, tapped it twice on the desk, and leaned in. "So, Oprah," she began, her voice coated with a sugary layer that fooled no one, "a lot of people are saying your new documentary." She paused just long enough to let the words settle, is a little out of touch. The air tightened. Sarah's eyes widened a bit. Alyssa's brows twitched. Whoopi shifted in her seat. Oprah's expression hardly changed. Her smile remained smooth, but her eyes sharpened. "Joy," she said calmly, "a lot of people say a lot of things. But the work speaks for itself." Joy chuckled, a short, mocking sound. Sure, of course, but I'm talking about real criticism. People saying a billionaire talking about struggle doesn't exactly land." A few audience members murmured. Oprah simply listened, still poised, letting Joy get the words out. "I understand the concern," Oprah replied evenly, "but the documentary isn't about me. It's about the people whose stories deserve to be heard." Joy waved a dismissive hand. "But don't you think maybe you've lost touch with the average American? I mean, people who are actually living these things, not just examining them from a mansion." Whoopi quietly sucked in a breath, as though bracing herself against a sudden wave. Sarah's eyes darted helplessly toward the producers. Alyssa shifted her mug just slightly, as though it might shield her from whatever was coming. Oprah kept her composure, to a point. She tilted her head slightly, like someone deciding whether a mosquito was worth swatting. "Well, Joy," she said, her tone still steady but firmer now, "I don't pretend to live anyone's life but my own. I don't pretend to experience other people's struggles. But I do listen. I listen deeply, and I amplify those voices responsibly." Joy smirked. "Listening from a penthouse is still listening, I guess." Oprah blinked slowly, once. A sign anyone who'd followed her career would recognize. It was the blink that meant she was measuring the weight of her words, choosing them carefully enough to cut without appearing to. "Joy," she said, voice low and resonant, "you invited me here to talk about the documentary. Not to belittle the courage of the people who participated in it." Joy leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "I'm just doing my job." Oprah leaned forward just slightly. "Then perhaps do it with respect." A gasp rippled through the studio, audible, collective. Joy's eyebrows shot up. She had expected pushback, maybe defensiveness, but not that clean, controlled strike. The moment the show cut to commercial, the studio dissolved into a kind of chaos that lived just beneath professionalism. Quick whispers, sharp glances, rushed movements from crew trying to pretend everything was fine. But nothing was fine, not after what had just happened on live television. Oprah sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable, as three producers approached her at once, speaking over one another in frantic, hushed tones. She didn't respond to any of them. She didn't even look their way. She simply breathed, slowly, evenly, like someone trying to contain a storm in her chest. Across the table, Joy Behar ripped off her mic pack with a kind of irritated flourish, muttering something to a stagehand who immediately pretended he didn't hear her. Her jaw was tight, her nostrils flaring. She spun in her chair and glared toward the producers as though the whole thing had been their fault. Whoopi leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes for a long moment, whispering what sounded like a prayer for patience. Sarah and Alyssa exchanged a silent, wide-eyed conversation of sheer panic. The floor manager shouted, 30 seconds. And everyone scrambled. Oprah tilted her head, lifted her chin, and smoothed the front of her blazer as though preparing for battle. Joy plopped herself down with a huff. The hosts took their positions, faces lifting into practiced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. When the show returned from commercial, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Whoopi, whose job it was to steer the turbulent waters of live daytime television, took the lead. "We're back with Oprah Winfrey," she said, voice measured but not entirely steady. "And we're having a spirited conversation." A laugh moved through the audience, awkward, nervous. Oprah didn't laugh. Joy didn't pretend to. Sarah looked like she wished she could dissolve into her chair. Joy leaned forward again, this time with a sharpness that made even the cameraman tense. "I just want to clarify," she said, "since apparently my questions are being seen as disrespect, that I'm doing what I've done on this show for years. We challenge our guests. We don't just coddle them." Oprah blinked once, slowly. "A storm cloud gathering. And there's a difference, Joy," she replied calmly, "between a challenge and a provocation." Joy scoffed. "Oh come on, isn't it a little dramatic to call it provocation? You're Oprah. You can handle a tough question without acting like I kicked your dog." A sharp murmur filled the room. Whoopi's eyes widened. "Joy," she warned softly. Sarah visibly winced. Alyssa actually dropped her pen. Oprah sat straighter. Her voice softened, which only made it more powerful. "What you did," she said, "was diminish the experiences of the very people this documentary is about. You redirected their stories back to me, because stirring controversy gets attention." Joy opened her mouth, but Oprah's voice doubled in force. "You want attention, Joy? Fine, but don't drag vulnerable voices into your theatrics." A ripple of applause burst from the audience. Real applause. Oprah didn't look toward them, she kept her eyes locked on Joy, unwavering. Joy's face darkened, the faintest tremble of anger at the corner of her mouth. "This is what bothers me about you," she snapped. "You come in here, act holier than thou, and expect no one to question you." Oprah raised a hand, quiet but commanding enough to stop Joy mid-sentence. "Question me all you want," she said, "but don't twist the purpose of a project that isn't about me just so you can create a moment." Joy let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Please, everything with you is a moment. You built an empire on that." It was said like an accusation. And Oprah's entire expression changed, not angry, not offended, but deeply disappointed, a kind of hurt that carried weight. "Joy," Oprah said, voice low, "you've sat across from hundreds of people on this show. You know the impact of your words. And today, you crossed a line." Joy's eyes flashed. "Oh, give me a break." "No," Oprah cut in, "you give them a break. The families who trusted us. The survivors who shared stories that cost them everything. And you reduce all of that to a swipe at my bank account." The audience erupted again, this time louder. Joy's breathing quickened, her chin jutted forward. "If you can't handle being questioned, maybe you shouldn't be promoting anything." Oprah pushed back her chair slightly, just enough to signal she'd had enough. "I can handle questions," she said, "but I will not tolerate disrespect disguised as journalism." Whoopi intervened, waving her hands. Okay, ladies, let's." But Oprah stood up, just stood, smooth, controlled, unhurried. The audience gasped, the hosts froze, even Joy's eyes widened, just a fraction. Oprah placed her hands on the desk, leaning in just enough to make the moment intimate and seismic at the same time. "I've done this for 40 years, she said quietly. "And I have never, not once, walked off a set." Her eyes locked onto Joy. "But today I'm willing."